She was 12 years old, small for her age, and nervous about flying alone for the first time. The ticket in her hand shook as she clutched it like a lifeline, the bold numbers 14F inked in black. Her father, who worked as an aircraft mechanic at the local hangar, had hugged her tightly at the gate, whispering a reminder before she boarded. Look out the window. The sky always has answers if you're paying attention. With those words echoing in her head, she slid into seat 14F, window seat, starboard side. She loved how the oval glass framed the world, offering her a private movie screen of sky and clouds. The plane hummed as passengers stuffed bags into overhead bins. A businessman argued into his phone. A mother soothed a crying toddler. None of it mattered to her. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, waiting for the moment the engines roared and the ground fell away. As the plane taxied, her fingers traced invisible shapes on the window-sleek fuselages, delta wings, twin tails. She had spent hours drawing fighter jets in the margins of her notebooks, so much so that her teachers sometimes scolded her for ignoring math problems. But she couldn't help it. While other kids memorized song lyrics, she memorized aircraft specifications, thrust-to-weight ratios, wing loading, maximum speed. Her classmates laughed and called her the airplane girl. She didn't care. Sitting in seat 14F, she felt closer to her dream than ever. The engines thundered, pressing her back into the seat. The jet gathered speed, wheels pounding against the runway, and then lift. The world tilted, buildings shrinking into toy-sized shapes, cars crawling like ants. Her heart raced. She wasn't in control, but she imagined she was the one at the stick, pulling back, commanding the climb. The contrails of another aircraft laced the blue above them, and she pictured herself in pursuit, throttle pushed forward, chasing the horizon with afterburners blazing. Her father's stories came alive in her mind. He had told her about test pilots who risked everything, about pioneers who believed flight wasn't just technology, it was spirit. He would come home from long shifts, hands stained with oil, and tell her how every aircraft carried a heartbeat. They're not just machines, he'd say. Their dreams turned metal. That thought echoed in her as she sat there, watching the patchwork earth disappear beneath clouds. In the seat pocket in front of her, she pulled out the flimsy in-flight magazine and tore a blank page from the back. Using the dull pencil from her school bag, she began sketching. The engine's vibrations made her lines shaky, but she didn't care. She drew an F-22 Raptor, her favorite jet, the predator of the skies, sleek and untouchable. She added missiles under the wings, shaded the angles that made it invisible to radar. The flight attendant paused beside her, leaning over with a smile. "That's some drawing," she said, surprised at the detail. The girl smiled shyly, but said nothing. Compliments didn't matter. What mattered was that, even at 12, she was building her own map to the sky. Hours passed, and most passengers fell asleep. The girl stayed glued to the window, mesmerized by the shifting world outside. The sun set, painting the clouds orange and gold. For a moment, the sky looked like fire. She imagined herself cutting through it, helmet on, HUD glowing, adrenaline in her veins. She didn't know how or when or what it would take, but she made a silent vow right there in seat 14F. I will fly. Not as a passenger, as a pilot. And not just any pilot, a fighter pilot. The promise burned into her like a secret oath. She thought about what it would take. Her father said fighter pilots were rare, chosen not only for skill but for endurance, discipline, and an ability to face fear without blinking. Could she do that? She was small, quiet, and often doubted by others. Yet here, above the clouds, doubt seemed smaller than ever. She wasn't afraid. If anything, she felt an ache to be part of the sky, not trapped behind glass watching it. She closed her eyes and listened to the engine's steady roar. It sounded less like machinery and more like a heartbeat. She thought of Amelia Earhart, Chuck Yeager, Bessie Coleman, names she'd read about in the library. They hadn't waited for permission. They had chased their dreams through ridicule, through danger, through fear. If they could, why couldn't she? The plane hit turbulence, jolting her out of thought. A passenger gasped, gripping the armrest. But she grinned, heart pounding with excitement. This was what flight meant: unpredictable, alive, demanding respect. Where others saw fear, she saw challenge. Hours later, when the plane began its descent into Washington, she pressed her palm to the glass as if to hold on to the sky a little longer. The ground rose to meet them, lights glittering below like constellations on Earth. She sighed, reluctant to return to gravity. When the wheels kissed the runway, she folded the napkin sketch carefully and tucked it into her backpack. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a contract with herself. A reminder that the girl in 14F would not always be a passenger. Someday, she would sit in a cockpit where the decisions were hers alone, where the horizon bowed, and where the sky no longer seemed untouchable. And though no one else on that flight noticed, something irreversible had happened. A girl who looked like just another quiet passenger had silently set a course. She was no longer a dreamer staring at clouds. She was a future pilot, and the sky, whether it knew it yet or not, was already hers. By the time she was 13, her bedroom looked less like a child's sanctuary and more like a small aviation museum. Model jets hung from the ceiling on fishing lines, frozen in simulated dogfights above her bed. Posters of aircraft covered the walls: F-22 Raptors, F-16 Falcons, even World War II classics like the P-51 Mustang. On her dresser sat a pile of aviation magazines, their glossy covers worn thin from repeated reading. Every day after school, she rushed home, threw her backpack onto the floor, and buried herself in aircraft manuals her father had scavenged from the hangar. The language was technical, dense with numbers and charts, but she devoured it like a novel. She could tell you the maximum thrust of a Pratt and Whitney F-119 engine or the radar cross-section of a stealth fighter. To her, these weren't statistics, they were poetry. At school, though, her passion set her apart. While her classmates giggled about pop stars or debated basketball teams, she slipped into conversations about aerodynamics and G-forces. The result was predictable: teasing. "Airplane girl," they'd sneer, rolling their eyes. Some mimicked engine noises when she walked past. At first, it stung, but over time, she stopped caring. Deep inside, she carried a secret weapon, the memory of Seat 14F and the promise she made there. Her father remained her anchor. On weekends, he took her to the airfield, where she'd sit quietly while he worked on engines. The scent of jet fuel clung to the air, sharp and intoxicating. She'd run her fingers over rivets in the metal, tracing the skin of machines that seemed alive. Sometimes, if the mechanics weren't too busy, they'd let her climb into a cockpit of a grounded trainer. She'd sit there, eyes wide, pretending she was in flight. "Don't just dream, kid," her father said one evening as they watched a plane taxi into the sunset. "Dreams are cheap. Work for it. That's how you make the sky yours." She took those words to heart. At 16, she found her first real opportunity: the Civil Air Patrol. Her high school counselor handed her a brochure, its cover showing teenagers in uniforms beside a small propeller plane. "It's not fighter jets," the counselor warned, "but it's where many pilots start." She didn't hesitate. The very next week, she signed up. Her first uniform felt awkward, the fabric stiff and oversized. But when she looked in the mirror, she stood taller. She was no longer just airplane girl. She was a cadet. The program wasn't glamorous. Most days involved drills, leadership training, or tedious safety lessons. But every second mattered to her. She treated every activity marching in formation, learning radio procedures, as if it were another rung on a ladder to her dream. Her peers sometimes groaned about the early mornings or strict rules, but she thrived under the structure. Then came the day she had been waiting for, her first orientation flight. The aircraft was nothing like the Raptors she sketched. It was a Cessna 172, slow and unthreatening, its white paint chipped from years of use. But to her, it was magic. As she buckled in beside the instructor, she felt her pulse quicken. The cockpit was cramped, the instruments simple, yet her hands itched to touch every dial. The engine sputtered to life, and the small plane rumbled down the runway. She gripped the edge of her seat, anticipation thrumming through her veins. The nose lifted, the ground fell away, and suddenly the airfield was a tiny grid below. Her breath caught. This wasn't like sitting in 14F, where she was just a passenger. This was different, closer, more intimate, more alive. The instructor guided her hands onto the yoke. "Your turn," he said. Her heart nearly exploded. She tightened her grip, adjusting carefully, afraid she might ruin everything. But the plane responded gently, tilting under her command. She nudged it left, then right, then leveled it again. The motion was smoother than she ever imagined. "How's it feel?" the instructor asked, watching her closely. She could barely speak, but the words came out as a whisper. "Like I belong here." That flight lasted less than an hour, but it rewired her world. She memorized every second the hum of the engine, the resistance in the yoke, the sight of fields and rivers stretching endlessly below. When they touched down, her hands still tingled, as though the sky had left an imprint on her skin. That night, she lay awake in bed, unable to sleep. She stared at the ceiling where her models hung, no longer frozen toys, but promises of what lay ahead. She thought again of her vow in seat 14F. Now it wasn't just a dream. She had touched it. She had tasted it. Of course, reality remained difficult. School still dragged her down with assignments, and her classmates didn't suddenly stop mocking her. But their laughter lost its sting. She carried something they couldn't see, the memory of being in control, however briefly, of a machine built to soar. They could call her names, but they couldn't strip that away. Her father noticed the change. "You're different now," he said one evening, wiping grease from his hands. "The sky got into you deeper this time." She smiled. "It's not in me, Dad. I'm in it." Over the next year, she threw herself into Civil Air Patrol. She rose quickly through the cadet ranks, not because she was the loudest or strongest, but because she worked harder than anyone else. She studied procedures late into the night, practiced drills until her feet blistered, and volunteered for every opportunity, no matter how small. Her call sign wasn't born yet, but among her peers, her reputation grew. She wasn't just the airplane girl anymore. She was the cadet who always showed up, who never quit, who dreamed bigger than anyone else dared. And deep inside, that vow from seat 14F burned brighter than ever. She wasn't chasing contrails anymore. She was chasing destiny, and the sky was beginning to notice. The letters came one after another, each one crisp, official, and heavy with disappointment. She opened them on the kitchen table, her hands trembling, her heart tightening before she even read the first line. "We regret to inform you." It became a refrain. The United States Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, our OTC scholarships. Each rejection struck like turbulence, throwing her off balance, leaving her staring at words that told her she wasn't good enough, not strong enough, not the kind of candidate they were looking for. She tried to hide the letters in her backpack, but her father found one. He didn't say much, just studied her face with the same quiet intensity he reserved for diagnosing a stubborn engine. "You can either believe what they write," he said finally, or prove them wrong. She wanted to believe him, but at night the doubt crept in. What if the recruiters were right? She was small. She wasn't the fastest runner in her class, nor the strongest. She wasn't born into a family of military officers. She was just the kid in seat 14F who sketched jets on napkins. But doubt never outweighed determination for long. By morning, she rose with a new fire. If they thought she wasn't strong enough, then she would become stronger. Her training began in the still darkness before dawn. While other teenagers slept, she laced her running shoes and pounded the pavement until her lungs burned. At first, she couldn't run a mile without gasping, but she refused to quit. Day after day, she pushed further 2 miles, 3, 5. She added push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, repeating them until her arms shook and her muscles screamed. Father sometimes stood at the porch, coffee in hand, watching her run past. "That's it, Phoenix," he'd murmur, using the name he'd begun calling her long before anyone else would. Rise from the fire. She didn't tell him how much it hurt, how many times she wanted to collapse in the grass and give up. She swallowed the pain, storing it like fuel. At school, her obsession became obvious. She carried flight manuals in her backpack, highlighting sections on navigation and meteorology during lunch breaks. She signed up for every science and math. Course she could, grinding through equations that baffled her classmates. When a teacher asked why she was working so hard, she answered simply, "Because jets don't forgive mistakes." Her peers still called her airplane girl, but now their voices carried less mockery and more curiosity. They saw her running, laps after practice, staying behind in classrooms to finish assignments, spending weekends at the airfield instead of parties. Slowly, the laughter faded into silence. Some even began to respect her, though she didn't need their approval. She wasn't chasing their validation. She was chasing the horizon. After 2 years of relentless work, another letter arrived. This one bore the insignia of a smaller military preparatory program, not the academy of her dreams, but a chance nonetheless. She read it 3 times, afraid the words might vanish. "We are pleased to offer you admission." She ran to her father, letter in hand, eyes shining. They said yes. He wrapped her in a hug, his grease-stained hands leaving marks on the paper. "Now you show them what I already know." The program was grueling from the first day. The moment she stepped onto the campus, instructors barked. Orders demanding push-ups, sprints, drills, all under the blistering sun. Cadets dropped out within weeks, their bodies and spirits breaking. She came close herself, once collapsing during a timed run, her vision blurred, her chest aching. She lay on the track, listening to her heartbeat hammer against her ribs, convinced she couldn't rise. But then she remembered the view from seat 14F, the vow whispered against the glass. She dragged herself up, one step at a time, finishing long after the others, but refusing to quit. That day, her instructors looked at her differently. She wasn't the fastest, but she was unbreakable. Academics were no easier. Physics lectures left her head spinning. Flight mechanics tests seemed designed to crush morale. She spent long nights in the library, her desk buried in notes, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. When others closed their books and went to bed, she pressed on, scribbling formulas until dawn. Her grades climbed slowly, stubbornly, as if pulled upward by sheer will. Her first time in the simulator was another trial. The F-22 cockpit replica loomed around her, its panels glowing, its complexity intimidating. Instructors watched from behind glass, arms crossed, ready to see her falter. She swallowed her nerves, hands trembling as she gripped the controls. The mission parameters loaded, enemy aircraft inbound, limited fuel, systems failing. It was a gauntlet designed to overwhelm. Her first attempt ended in failure, the screen flashing red as her jet spiraled into virtual flames. She pulled off the headset, sweat dripping down her temple. Instructors said nothing, just scribbled notes. Most cadets left defeated. She stayed behind. For hours, she replayed the mission, dissecting her mistakes, studying the control systems until her fingers memorized every switch. When she climbed back in the next day, something clicked. She moved with measured confidence, adjusting tactics, conserving fuel, outmaneuvering the simulated enemy. When the screen flashed mission success, silence filled the observation room. Then, a single nod from an instructor. Approval, hard-earned and rare. She wasn't celebrated yet. She wasn't saluted or applauded. But in that nod, she found proof. Proof that she belonged. Proof that the kid in seat 14F had stepped closer to her destiny. Her reputation grew. Some cadets resented her intensity, whispering that she was obsessed. Others began to admire her, seeking her help during study sessions, trusting her calm presence during group drills. Slowly, she carved a place for herself not because she fit the mold, but because she shattered it and built her own. One evening, after a long day of drills, she sat alone on the bleachers, staring at the fading contrails high above. Exhaustion weighed heavy, but so did pride. She thought of every rejection letter, every insult, every moment she nearly broke. None of it mattered now. She was still here, still standing, still rising. And deep inside, she knew something her instructors hadn't yet realized. She wasn't just surviving the program. She was becoming the pilot she had always promised herself she would be. The sky was no longer just a dream. It was waiting. The first time she walked into the simulator bay, she felt as if she had stepped into another world. The room was dim, humming with electricity, rows of glowing monitors casting blue light across the walls. At the center sat the machine itself, a full-scale replica of the F-22 cockpit. To her, it looked like the throne of a god. Sleek, intimidating, covered with panels of buttons and switches that only the initiated could understand. The instructors, veterans of countless flights, stood off to the side with arms crossed. Their expressions were practiced masks of indifference, but she could see the skepticism in their eyes. They had seen cadets freeze up in here, overwhelmed by the complexity. Some cadets panicked, others gave up before finishing the first mission. They expected no different from her. "Cadet, strap in," one barked, his voice echoing through the bay. Her pulse quickened. She climbed the ladder into the cockpit, sliding into the narrow seat. The harness clicked shut across her chest, heavy and tight. She inhaled deeply, fingers brushing over the throttle, the stick, the panels. For a moment, she wasn't a cadet anymore. She was the kid in seat 14F again, forehead pressed against the window, imagining herself in command. The canopy closed with a hiss, sealing her inside. Screens flickered to life, surrounding her with the digital illusion of sky and horizon. The simulation loaded, a combat scenario over hostile territory. Enemy fighters inbound. Limited fuel. Faulty systems. The kind of nightmare designed to test reflexes and break nerves. Her headset crackled. Mission parameters are live. Begin when ready. Her heart pounded. She pushed the throttle forward, and the simulated jet roared down the runway, leaping into the virtual sky. The sensation was startlingly real. The vibration, the sound, the sense of acceleration pressing her into the seat. Her hands trembled, but she tightened her grip and focused. The first blip appeared on the radar. Enemy inbound. Her instinct screamed at her to turn and engage, but training echoed in her mind. Don't rush. Don't panic. She steadied her breathing, rolling the jet into a climb. The simulator shook as enemy fire streaked past, alarms shrieking in her ears. She banked hard left, narrowly escaping a lock-on. Her fingers danced over controls, switching countermeasures, adjusting throttle. Sweat slid down her temple, but her mind sharpened with every second. This was what she had prepared for every mile run in the dark, every formula memorized, every rejection swallowed. She launched a missile. One enemy blip vanished from the radar. Her chest swelled with triumph, but the simulation offered no mercy. 2 more blips appeared. Systems flashed warnings. Fuel critical. Weapons malfunction. Her throat tightened. The jet lurched, and then the screen went black. Mission failed, the automated voice droned. A canopy opened, and she ripped off her headset, breathing hard. She had lasted longer than some, but it wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for what she carried in her chest since Seat 14F. The instructor scribbled notes, their faces unreadable. One muttered, "Average." She climbed down the ladder, humiliation burning hot in her stomach. Average. The word stung worse than failure. She didn't leave, though. When the next cadet entered the simulator, she stayed behind, standing in the shadows, memorizing every move on the screens. She studied the mistakes, the successes, the patterns. That night, while others slept, she returned to the manuals. She traced the schematics of the F-22, whispered procedures under her breath, and replayed every moment of her failed mission in her mind. What had she done wrong? What could she do differently? She refused to let the word average define her. The next day, when her turn came again, she walked into the bay with a different kind of focus. She climbed into the cockpit and closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the whispers, the doubts. She wasn't just in a simulator. She was in the sky she had claimed years ago. The mission loaded. Hostile territory. Limited fuel. Enemy fighters. Her hands moved with calm precision. She launched flares before the missiles even reached her, rolled into evasive maneuvers, and cut fuel consumption by adjusting her throttle at just the right intervals. The instructors leaned forward, exchanging glances. She didn't rush to fire. She stalked her opponents, using radar shadows to her advantage. One by one, she outmaneuvered them. Her jet screamed through the digital clouds, her movements fluid, instinctive. Target eliminated, the automated voice confirmed. The blips vanished, the skies cleared, and the simulation declared mission success. For a moment, silence filled the bay. Then, faintly, she heard an instructor mutter, "She doesn't flinch." The canopy opened, and she climbed down, her legs shaky, but her heart soaring. She didn't smile, she didn't need to. The look in the instructor's eyes was enough. The skepticism had cracked, replaced with something rarer. Respect. Word spread quickly. Cadets whispered about the girl who had beaten the impossible scenario. Some were jealous, others inspired. She didn't care about either. What mattered was that she had proven to herself what she had always known. She was born to fly. From that day, her relationship with the simulator changed. It was no longer just a training tool. It was a proving ground. She spent hours inside, pushing herself through every scenario, testing the limits of both machine and mind. She failed, stumbled, and learned, each setback sharpening her resolve. Instructors began to push her harder. "Run her through red flag," one ordered, referencing the Air Force's toughest combat exercise. "See how she handles overwhelming odds." Again and again, they threw her into chaos. Swarms of enemies, impossible weather conditions, catastrophic system failures. Each time she fought through, not with reckless aggression, but with a calm, calculated determination. Her reputation grew. Some started calling her the Ice Cadet because she stayed cool under pressure. She didn't mind. The nickname wasn't official, but it carried the weight of recognition. Late one night, after another marathon session in the simulator, she sat on the hangar steps staring at the stars. The sky stretched endlessly above, silent and vast. She remembered the kid in seat 14F, forehead pressed against the window, dreaming of this moment. She whispered softly to herself, "You're closer now. Closer, but not yet there." The real jet still waited. The real sky still called. And when that day came, she knew she wouldn't just fly. She would rise. The morning of her first real flight arrived like the edge of a dream. The base buzzed with a tension she hadn't felt before. Other cadets whispered about it in the mess hall, trading nervous grins and hollow jokes to mask their fear. For her, there was no fear. There was anticipation, a fire that had burned since seat 14F. This was the day she had replayed, in her mind 1,000 times. As dawn broke, the flight lines shimmered in the cool air. Rows of jets gleamed under the rising sun, their metallic skins glowing orange and gold. Among them stood the one she had been assigned, the F-22 Raptor. Its lines were sharper than the simulator could capture, its presence almost alive. She paused as she approached, heart hammering. She had dreamed of this machine for years, but standing before it now, she felt the gravity of what she was about to do. A crew chief in a grease-stained jumpsuit met her with a clipped nod. "Cadet, she's ready for you." She ran her gloved hand along the fuselage, fingers tracing rivets and steel. The jet seemed to hum under her touch, a predator waiting to leap. The smell of fuel filled the air, sharp and intoxicating. She climbed the ladder, each step a beat of destiny. Sliding into the cockpit, she felt the seat embrace her like it had been carved for her alone. The canopy sealed. The world outside vanished. Inside, the cockpit glowed with lights and displays. She strapped in, harness pulling tight across her chest, oxygen mask hanging loose for now. Her breath quickened. "Cadet, confirm pre-flight," came the instructor's voice over comms. He was in a separate jet, flying lead. Her hands moved across the panels, checking systems. Pre-flight complete. All systems green. Copy. Engines on. She pressed the start sequence. The F-22 came alive beneath her. The twin engines roared, a low growl rising into a thunderous scream. The cockpit vibrated, and her heart vibrated with it. She swallowed hard. This wasn't a simulator anymore. This was real steel, real power, real sky. Taxi to runway. She guided the Raptor forward, wheels rolling across the tarmac. Every movement felt heavier than in training, every adjustment magnified. The jet responded, but it demanded respect. She wasn't controlling it, she was learning to speak its language. They reached the runway. Her instructor's jet aligned ahead. "Cadet, when I say go, throttle to max. Don't think, just fly." Her fingers curled around the throttle. Her mind raced back to the girl in 14F, forehead pressed to the window, watching the world fall away beneath her. She had waited years for this moment. "Go!" She slammed the throttle forward. The engines screamed, and the jet shot down the runway like a living bullet. Her body pressed hard into the seat, G-forces crushing her chest. Her vision narrowed, heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled back on the stick, and the world tilted. The ground fell away, the horizon tilted, and then she was flying. The jet soared into the sky, engines thundering, slicing through clouds as if they were nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. It was louder, rougher, and more violent than she had imagined. Every turn rattled her bones. Every climb stole her breath. But it was real. The radio crackled. "Stay close, cadet. Don't lose formation." She tightened her grip and followed the lead jet, her eyes darting between instruments and sky. Sweat stung her eyes, but she kept steady. The instructor tested her, banking sharply, climbing into near-vertical angles, diving fast enough to make her stomach twist. Each move dared her to falter. She didn't. Then came the true test. Combat maneuvering, cadet. Let's see what you've got. Her throat went dry. This wasn't the simulator. Every mistake carried real weight. The instructor's jet rolled hard and accelerated away. She chased him, pulling the stick, her body slamming against the seat as the G-forces tore at her. Her lungs fought for air. Her vision dimmed at the edges, but she held on. The Raptor roared beneath her, straining like a beast eager to unleash itself. She locked radar on his tail. Missile tone blared. Fox 3. She shouted, her voice raw with adrenaline. Her instructor laughed over comms. Good luck. Now dodge this. His jet broke right, flares bursting, and swooped around behind her. Her alarm shrieked. She rolled left and yanked back hard, the world spinning in a blur of sky and earth. Her body screamed in protest, chest tight, veins burning. But somewhere deep inside, past the pain, she found focus. She moved with instinct, rolling inverted, cutting throttle, and snapping the jet back into climb. His lock slipped. She reversed the angle, found his tail again, and held it steady. Fox 3. The comm went silent for a beat. Then, faintly, she heard it. Well done, cadet. Her chest heaved, sweat dripping down her temple. She had done it, not just survived, but fought. Back on the ground, she climbed out of the cockpit, legs trembling. The crew chief gave her a crooked grin. You're still standing. That's something. The instructor approached, helmet under his arm. He studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he smirked. We've got ourselves a flyer. Not bad, 14F. She froze. Sir? That's your call sign, he said, loud enough for the other cadets to hear. 14 Foxtrot. Kid in the seat who thought she was just watching. Turns out she was preparing. The words sank into her chest, heavier than any medal could be. Call signs weren't given lightly. They were earned in sweat, grit, and sky. And now she had one. Around her, the other cadets nodded in quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't just another trainee anymore. She had stepped into the brotherhood of pilots, claimed her place in the lineage of those who answered the sky's call. That night, lying in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over. The roar of the engines still echoed in her ears. Her body still ached from the strain, but her spirit was alight. She had flown the Raptor, survived its trial, and walked away with a name. 14 Foxtrot. She whispered it softly into the dark. It wasn't just a call sign. It was proof that the dream born in seat 14F had finally touched reality. And yet, she knew this was only the beginning. The sky was vast, the challenges greater still. What she had done today was a single step into a life of battles, triumphs, and sacrifices she couldn't yet imagine. But as she drifted into exhausted sleep, one truth burned steady in her heart: she belonged here. And no storm, no enemy, no doubt could take that away. The orders came without ceremony. One morning she was running drills on base, sweat burning her eyes under the Nevada sun. That evening she was sitting in a briefing room, with maps spread across the table, and the word deployment stamped in red across the header. Her first mission would not be practice. It would be war. The room hummed with restrained tension as officers outlined the operation. Enemy aircraft had been spotted harassing Allied patrols overseas, pushing territorial lines. The message was clear. The Raptor wing would deploy to stabilize the skies. She was assigned to the squadron. When her name was read aloud, she felt a dozen heads turn. Veterans, men and women who had logged thousands of flight hours, glanced her way with faint smirks and lifted brows. A cadet? On her first mission? The commanding officer silenced the murmurs. She's earned her seat. Out there, you'll treat her like any other pilot. And if you doubt her, you'll answer to me. Still, she could feel their skepticism burn. She swallowed it like fuel. She had been doubted her entire journey. This was nothing new. 2 weeks later, she stepped onto the foreign tarmac. The air was thick with heat and dust, engines roaring as jets were prepped for combat. The base smelled of oil, sweat, and anticipation. Camouflage tents flapped in the wind, soldiers moved with urgency, and the night sky glowed faintly from distant flashes of conflict. Her jet waited at the edge of the line, sleek, predatory. Ready? As she pulled her helmet on, she caught her reflection in its visor-steady eyes, lips pressed in determination. This was no longer training. Out there, mistakes cost lives. The radio crackled to life. Raptor Squadron, ready up. Hostiles inbound, 20 miles. Engage and push them back. Engines thundered as the Raptors rolled into formation. The ground shook beneath their power. She guided her jet forward, heart pounding. 14F, you're on my wing, her lead called. It was an order laced with a test. Copy, she replied, voice even. The squadron lifted into the night. The sky swallowed them whole, stars blurring past as their formation cut across the dark. Her breath caught in all this was the sky she had claimed as hers. But there was no time to linger. Radar lit up. Hostiles inbound. Fast. Her stomach tightened as alarms blinked across the HUD. Dozens of red blips fanned across the screen. This wasn't a simulator. These weren't scripted enemies. This was real steel, real missiles, real intent to kill. Engage! The squadron broke formation, scattering into combat. Engines roared, flares burst, and streaks of light carved across the sky. She yanked the stick, rolling hard into evasive maneuvers. G-forces slammed her chest, vision tunneling. She bit down, forcing breath through the mask. An enemy fighter locked onto her 6. Alarm shrieked. She dumped flares and rolled inverted, snapping the jet downward into a dive. The Raptor groaned under the strain, wings cutting the night air. The missile streaked past, exploding harmlessly behind. Her training surged forward. Instinct took over. She pulled the jet up, throttled forward, and found the enemy's tail. Radar tone screamed. Fox 3. She called, launching. The missile streaked true, detonating in a burst of fire. Her chest pounded with savage triumph, her first kill. Nice work, 14F, her lead barked. No trace of doubt, no. But the battle was far from over. 3 more hostiles broke toward her sector. Her radar swarmed with threats. Sweat soaked her gloves. She maneuvered, trading shots, countering locks, rolling through flares until her body ached with exhaustion. Her arms burned, lungs begged for relief, but she pressed on. One hostile dove directly into her path. She jerked the stick, colliding in a near miss, so close the shockwaves rattled her cockpit. Her breath hitched, but her hands never left the controls. She flipped into pursuit, locked tone, fired. Another kill. Her squadron held the line. Raptors moved like wolves through the dark, tearing into enemy formations. But it was brutal, an hour of high-speed chaos, missiles exploding, metal burning through the night sky. At last, the final hostile blip vanished from her screen. Silence fell across the comms. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. She had survived. She had fought. She had won. Back at base, she climbed from the cockpit, legs trembling. Her gloves were slick with sweat, her arms numb from the fight. The tarmac was buzzing, ground crews running, officers shouting reports, but all she heard was her own pulse. Then she noticed them. The other pilots stood nearby, helmets under arms, watching her. Veterans who had doubted her, tested her, expected her to fail. For a long, heavy moment, No one spoke. Then the lead pilot, the one who had ordered her onto his wing, stepped forward. He stopped a few feet away, studied her with sharp eyes, then raised his hand in a crisp salute. 14 Foxtrot, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. You've earned your sky. One by one, the others followed. Helmets tucked, backs straight, hands raised in salute. A dozen F-22 pilots, warriors of the air, honoring her call sign. Her throat tightened. She had imagined respect. She had dreamed of belonging. But this moment was beyond her dreams. She returned the salute, hand trembling only slightly. The salutes broke into nods, claps on her shoulder, brief words of welcome. She wasn't just tolerated now. She was one of them. That night, lying on her bunk in the sweltering barracks, she stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above. The roar of combat still echoed in her bones. The smell of smoke and fuel lingered in her hair. She should have been exhausted, but her mind burned with a single truth. She had crossed the line. She was no longer the kid dreaming in seat 14F. She was one 4F Raptor pilot, saluted by those she once idolized. But she also knew the sky would demand more. Tonight was a victory, but tomorrow would bring harder battles, sharper tests, and sacrifices she could not yet see. And she was ready. The night began like any other sortie. The squadron had been tasked with escorting reconnaissance drones across hostile airspace, a mission considered routine. But she knew by now that routine was a word the sky rarely honored. She suited up in silence, checking her gear with steady hands. Around her, pilots moved with practiced precision, helmets clutched under their arms, eyes set with the calm of experience. Her call sign, 14F, echoed across the radio as assignments were read. She was not the rookie anymore. She had her own wingman now, a younger pilot who looked at her the way she had once looked at the veterans. The realization tightened her chest. Responsibility carried a different kind of weight than G-forces. The Raptors lifted into the black sky, engines roaring in unison. The horizon glowed faintly with starlight, broken by scattered clouds. For a while, everything felt almost serene. The drones hummed steadily in formation, and the squadron glided around them like guardians. She even allowed herself a rare breath of ease. Then the radar lit up. Blips swarmed across her display far more than expected. Enemy fighters were approaching fast, their formation spread wide. Her heart clenched. This wasn't routine. It was an ambush. Multiple contacts. Defensive posture. The squadron leader barked. The sky erupted in chaos. Hostile fighters dove in from every direction, missiles streaking like burning spears. Flares burst, alarms shrieked, and the radio filled with overlapping shouts. 14F, protect the drones. Her leader ordered. She peeled away, rolling hard to intercept. Her wingman followed, nervous strain audible in his breathing. The drones were slow and vulnerable. Without cover, they'd be shredded in minutes. The first enemy locked onto a drone. She slammed the throttle, closing fast. Radar tones screamed as she fired. Her missile streaked true, blasting the hostile into a fireball. Good hit, her wingman called. But there were too many. Missiles sliced through the sky, and one drone exploded in a plume of fire. The others wobbled as if startled prey. Her jaw clenched. Losing one was bad. Losing them all would cripple the mission. Stay sharp. She barked at her wingmen. They fought like wolves, darting and striking, pushing the enemy back inch by inch. Her jet twisted through the night, muscles straining against punishing Gs. She scored 2 more kills, but every second felt like quicksand. For every hostile they dropped, 2 more pressed in. Then the worst sound filled her headset, her wingman's panicked cry. Missile lock. I can't shake it. Her blood turned to ice. She glanced at the radar. He was pinned, boxed in by 2 fighters. His flares spent. His voice cracked, fear raw. Instinct screamed at her to break off, save him. But that would leave the drones exposed. If they lost the mission, lives on the ground would pay the price. Her heart hammered. Seconds stretched. Leadership was not about choice, it was about sacrifice. She made her decision. Hold tight, she shouted. Slamming her throttle, she broke formation, diving toward him. The drones were left vulnerable, but she couldn't let him die, not under her watch. She rolled inverted, dove beneath his jet, and pulled up hard, cutting across the enemy's path. Fox 2. She called, firing. The missile ripped one hostile apart. The second peeled away, startled by her sudden aggression. Her wingman gasped in relief. You're clear. She snapped. 1-4F. I thought I was done, he whispered. Not while I'm here, she replied, voice hard. But saving him had cost them dearly. Another drone went down in flames, and the remaining 2 wobbled dangerously close to the engagement zone. Her stomach twisted. She had protected her wingman, but the mission balance teetered on collapse. Squadron, regroup. The leader barked, but his voice cut off mid-command. Static filled the channel. Her radar showed his jet spiraling, smoke trailing. Her breath caught. The leader was down. For a heartbeat, the squadron staggered without guidance. And voices overlapped in chaos, confusion, panic, calls for orders that never came. Without thinking, she keyed her comms. This is 1-4F, form on me. Defend the drones. Keep the skies tight. There was hesitation, a flicker of doubt. She wasn't the leader. She wasn't the veteran. But no one else was giving direction. And in the storm of silence, her voice carried weight. Copy, 1-4F. One pilot finally answered. Then another. The Raptors closed ranks around her, and together they forced the fight back. Missiles cut the night, flares bloomed like dying stars, and their formation tightened around the drones. She gave orders with crisp calm, her voice steady even as her body shook with strain. One drone limped across the last mile of hostile airspace, smoke trailing. The other followed, wings scarred but intact. The surviving pair made it through. When the last hostile peeled away, fuel low and courage broken, the silence that followed was deafening. She stared at her displays, chest heaving, arms trembling. Against the odds, against the storm, they had survived. Back at base, the landing was somber. They had lost 2 drones and their squadron leader. The hangar was heavy with exhaustion and grief. Yet as she pulled off her helmet, she found the eyes of the others on her, not with skepticism, but with quiet acknowledgement. Her wingman approached first, his face pale but resolute. You saved me out there, he said. If not for you, I'd be gone. She didn't answer. The weight of the lost drones pressed too heavily. Later, in the debriefing, the commanders listened as the surviving pilots spoke. One after another, they credited her with pulling the squadron together, with saving lives when chaos threatened to consume them. When the session ended, a senior officer stopped her at the door. His gaze was sharp, but his tone carried something she hadn't expected: respect. You made the hard call, he said. That's what leaders do. You've stepped into more than a cockpit. 1-4F, you've stepped into command. That night, alone in her bunk, she replayed the mission. The roar of engines, the screaming alarms, her wingman's desperate voice. She thought of the drones lost, the leader down, the narrow margin between survival and disaster. Her call sign had started as a memory, a reminder of a girl in seat 1-4F who once dreamed of the sky. But now it had become something more. It was not just hers, it was theirs. The squadron had looked to her in the firestorm, and she had answered. The dream had carried her here. Responsibility would carry her further. As dawn light crept through the barracks window, she whispered into the stillness, "I'll be ready for whatever comes next." The morning was eerily quiet. The base sat under a heavy sky, clouds thick and gray, muting the usual roar of engines. She stood at the edge of the tarmac, helmet in hand, staring at her F-22. It gleamed like obsidian, sleek and powerful, an extension of herself. This was no training sortie. This was the culmination of years of relentless preparation, of every setback, every rejection, every lesson learned in sweat and fire. Her squadron assembled behind her, pilots and wingmen waiting for the signal. They had fought with her before, survived with her, trusted her decisions in combat. Now they were ready to follow her into the fiercest engagement of their careers. The mission was clear. A rogue faction had seized control of a strategic corridor, deploying advanced aircraft to harass Allied airspace. Satellite imagery showed multiple launch sites, defensive turrets, and a squadron of hostile jets. The odds were grim. Intelligence estimated a near 50-50 survival rate for the first wave. She felt a familiar tension in her chest, the same she had felt the first time she gripped the throttle of the simulator, the first time she climbed into the Raptor for real, and the first time the hostile blips lit up her radar overseas. But this time, it was tempered by something stronger, confidence forged in years of challenge. She was ready. 1-4F, her wingman said quietly, reading the determination etched across her face. "Let's bring them home. Stay sharp," she replied. "And trust the formation." The Raptors lifted off as one, engines screaming in unison. The sky was an open expanse, yet it felt confined with the weight of expectation pressing down. She felt the familiar hum of power beneath her, the heartbeat of the jet syncing with her own. Every muscle, every nerve was alert. Every decision mattered. Radar pinged immediately. Hostiles inbound, faster and more numerous than anticipated. Her HUD glowed red with multiple contacts. She breathed, reminding herself of every maneuver drilled, every lesson etched in memory. There was no room for hesitation. "Engage," she commanded. The sky erupted in motion. Jets twisted and rolled, missiles streaked past, and the sound of engines filled her ears like thunder. Her body fought against G-forces, lungs burned, vision narrowed, but her mind was crystal clear. She tracked threats, coordinated her wingmen, and maintained formation around the Allied assets they were protecting. An enemy fighter broke formation and targeted her wingman. She reacted instinctively, rolling inverted and cutting between the fighter and her teammate. Missiles flashed past them, narrowly avoided. She fired. Explosion. Threat neutralized. But the battle was far from over. Another rogue squadron dove in from above. She analyzed patterns, predicting their movements. Calling out commands over the comms, she guided her team with precision. Left flank, Fox 2. Maintain altitude. Drone escort intact. Keep pressure. Her wingmen followed every instruction. They moved as one, a disciplined unit forged by trust and fire. The dance of jets was violent and lethal, yet orchestrated with her steady command. Hours or maybe minutes, time blurred in combat, passed in a whirlwind of strategy and adrenaline. They eliminated key threats, suppressed launch sites, and protected all Allied drones. Every maneuver tested her endurance. Every decision carried consequences. Then came the final enemy blip, a lone fighter, faster, more aggressive, maneuvering for a kill run. She tracked it, adjusting her approach with split-second calculations. The jet's velocity threatened to break her formation, and the strain was almost unbearable. But she refused to falter. "Fox 3," she called, releasing a missile. The fighter twisted, but the lock held. Explosion. Target destroyed. Silence fell. The clouds above moved gently, almost oblivious to the chaos below. The surviving hostile jets had retreated. The corridor was secured. Her squadron regrouped, engines roaring in relief and exhaustion. She keyed the comms. All units status report. Voices crackled back, calm but strained. All clear. Mission success. When she finally landed, legs trembling, sweat stinging her eyes, she saw the reactions around her. Pilots emerged from their jets, removing helmets, hands on hips, adrenaline still pulsing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, they approached. The squadron leader, the veteran who had once doubted her, walked to her, helmet under arm. His face was unreadable at first. Then he raised his hand in the crispest salute she had ever seen. 14F, he said, voice steady. You've led us through hell and come out alive. Your call sign carries weight now. You've earned every inch of it. Salute returned. Every pilot around them followed, backs straight, helmets removed, hands raised in respect. She returned each salute, feeling the years of struggle, training, and perseverance converge into this singular moment. Seat 14F, the girl who had sketched jets on napkins, had become a pilot worthy of the sky's harshest respect. After the formalities, she walked among her squadron. Wingmen clapped her shoulder, whispered congratulations, and acknowledged her leadership. She didn't boast. She didn't smile widely. Pride was quiet, contained within the knowledge that she had proven herself in the crucible of real combat. Later, alone in the hangar, she stared at her Raptor. Its surface reflected the soft light of the late afternoon sun, wings sharp, canopy gleaming. She ran her gloved hand along the fuselage. Years of dreams, failures, lessons, and victories had led to this. Her mind wandered back to that first flight, to the kid in seat 14F who had pressed her forehead against the window, dreaming of the sky. She thought of every early morning, every run, every rejection letter, every simulator failure, every doubt she had fought to overcome. And now she understood. Those moments had not been obstacles. They had been preparation. They had forged the pilot she had become. She whispered softly, almost to herself, I'll keep flying, always. In the distance, jets roared, taking off for routine patrols. The sky stretched endlessly, a canvas she had learned to command. And she knew this. The call sign 14F was no longer just a name. It was a symbol, a testament to perseverance, courage, and the spirit of a girl who refused to remain a passenger. The world would remember the missions, the victories, the Raptor pilots who had once saluted her. But she would always remember the first flight, the first simulator, and that small window seat where it all began. The sky waited for her still, and she would answer.